to talk to someone who is close to the White House, who has worked with a variety of administrations in trying to solve the intractable conflict of the Israeli-Palestinian situation. He is now London-based. He is a media analyst and senior advisor for the Chertoff Group. We say good afternoon to Jonathon Paris. Hello, Jonathan. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Johnny. Good to be here.
It's great to have you on. Jonathan, first of all, your credentials in this, and the reason why I asked you today is because you have spent a lot of time writing papers in your expertise in the Middle East. Is it true to say that the unifying cause that is going to bring Middle East peace together is the threat of Iran?
I'd say that Iran looms behind every aggression against Israel right now, and pretty much every instability. Not every single instability in the Middle East can be traced to Iran, but probably 90%. Without Iran, Hamas would not have been able to make this attack on October 7th, even though Iran claims that they didn't know about it. They were surprised about after the Hezbollah launched their attack. But without the training and the weapons and the support from Iran, Hamas would not have done this.
I read somewhere, and in the torrent of news provision, I can't make head or tail of this. So one of the reasons I get to ask experts like yourself is that I can clear away some of the fake news and some of the real news. Is it true that there was, even amongst some Hamas leadership, a lack of knowledge about what the military side of Hamas would do? That actually Hamas is not as joined up as people might think?
Well, there are two parts to your question. The first part is, why did we miss this attack? And I think this is because of groupthink on the part of the Israelis, Israeli military establishment. They thought, nobody's going to attack Israel because we're so strong. And what would be the consequences of an attack? Israel will retaliate, which is what they're doing now, and carrying out a massive attack on Gaza. So that was a big mistake. The other mistake, I think, is that they thought that the Hamas people think like Israelis, like Westerners, which is, hey, we've got 20 to 30,000 Gazans working every day. We've got this Qatari money coming in every week. We've got a relatively stable situation. It's awful, in terms of poverty level, but it wasn't so bad, and it was getting a little bit better, marginally better. Why risk it and start another war? So nobody really thought in terms of what Hamas's logic is. Hamas logic is not equal to the Israeli logic. Hamas seems to care more about killing Israeli children than about making a better life for their children. And I think that is a very strange calculus to get your hand around. But I think that explains why Israel was so surprised.
And indeed, you've highlighted well the idea that there is absolutely no diplomatic relationship that Israel could ever build with Hamas or its sympathizers or its supporters. Neither can Israel rely on the Palestinian Authority, with a leader who's 88 years old and never had an election, running scared of a democratic idea that would probably elect Hamas in the West Bank. So, Jonathan, we have to look beyond the contours of even perhaps the Israeli leadership that exists today, Benjamin Netanyahu, and anything coming out of the Palestinian Authority or Hamas. Jonathan, where is peace going to come from? I have contended in the show so far that it might come from the Saudis, from the Abraham Accords partners, and from the Biden administration.
Well, that's a good launching point, Johnny, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the Abraham Accords. There's no doubt about it that the Abraham Accords was the best thing that's happened in the last 10 years. Let's go back a little bit. Can I just spend a minute on how they came about? Because it's kind of interesting.
Please.
Trump wanted to win a Nobel Prize, and he thought the way to do it was to bring an Israel-Palestinian peace agreement. because that worked in the past. You remember Rabin and Arafat got the Nobel Prize, and Paris got the Nobel Prizes for the 1993 White House Oslo process. But something happened along the way, and that is the Trump plan for the Middle East was so out in left field for the Palestinians. It didn't go anywhere with the Palestinians, but it also got a response from the right wingers in the Israeli government. And Netanyahu was talking about annexing part of the West Bank. And here comes the UAE, and the UAE says, the United Arab Emirates, they say, look, if we can persuade Netanyahu not to annex a good portion of the West Bank, we will normalize relations with Israel. And that's precisely what happened. So the UAE basically stepped in and did what they wanted to do anyway, which is normalize relations with Israel. But this way, they got something from Israel, which is giving up on this annexation plan. And then what followed was Bahrain, which in some ways is a proxy for Saudi Arabia. Bahrain has always been like a stalking horse for Saudi Arabia. And so one could see the fingerprints of Saudi Arabia. We'll get to Saudi in a second. But I want to say one other thing. The Trump administration also, paid in American currency to get Morocco on board and to get Sudan on board. So those are the four countries that entered the Abraham Accords. And that, to me, was a sign of the future of the Middle East. The future security architecture of the Middle East will be these moderate Arab countries together with Israel trying to build a more resilient Middle East, a more prosperous and economically prosperous Middle East, as opposed to the past and the resistance leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, which is something from the past, trying to resist Israel and not really put any emphasis on improving the lives of the peoples in the Middle East.
Which begs the question, if not now, when for Saudi Arabia, who for so long have acted in normalization terms without signing treaties with Israel, whose ambitions for normalization have been put back by this terrible war, can, when this terrible war is finished, the entirety of hope for normalization between Saudi and Israel be resurrected, if not under the Biden administration, but perhaps under a future Trump administration?
Well, let's stay for the moment with the Biden administration, because I think there's a lot of time left.
Is there a lot of time? I mean,
I think that let's put it this way. You could say in an election year, the last thing the Biden administration wanted to do was spend any time on the Middle East. They wanted to focus on Asia and on Ukraine. But here's something that I want you to think about. You could see this coming, the Saudi-Israel normalization coming a long time ago. I was an undergraduate in college, in university, right after the Yom Kippur War, which was so devastating. And this was even before the Islamic Republic of Iran. And you could see that Saudi Arabia was flushed with this newly discovered energy monopoly called OPEC. And they were going to become a very prosperous country, and they needed stability. They wanted the status quo. And then you have Israel, which has just gotten through that awful Yom Kippur War, not too different from the current war, and they wanted stability at last. So I could see some kind of tacit alliance even 50 years ago between Saudis and Israel. It's taken 50 years for it to just start to show the outlines, but you can see the outlines, and they are, as it's going on now, a lot is going on under the table. I think it's more important that relations continue under the table than that they have formal embassies and formal diplomatic recognition. That's for show. But what's really important is that Saudi Arabia recognizes its foe, its long-term adversary is not the Israelis, it's Iran and their nuclear project.
I was talking to a security advisor about what Israel might do beyond the current war front in Gaza to try and solve the bigger problems surrounding Iran, and there might be talk about taking on Lebanon and Hezbollah, but of course there are 150,000 rockets in civilian areas being pointed at Israel, which would cause devastation. But actually going straight to the head of the snake in Iran. Now, there have been some very audacious assassinations of those who head up nuclear programs, of the Americans assassinating the chief military officer Soleimani. But I'm just wondering perhaps what can be done to take on Iran at this point, because Israel has perennially only fought Iran's proxies without actually really going for the head of the snake.
I have to tell you, I mean, I had just as I had a positive feeling about Saudi Israel, I had an awful feeling 44 years ago that the United States had really dropped the ball when they allowed Khomeini, not Khamenei, the
Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini,
yeah, to get off that plane and was 78 and then early 79, the revolution happened. And now we're living with how many years? 44, going on 45 years of this basically a country has been hijacked by an ideological cadre of Islamists who are, by the way, as interested, if not more so, in exporting their Islamic revolution to places like Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, to name a few, than to helping improve the lives of Iran. The Iranian people have suffered. And basically, we haven't figured out a way for the majority of Iranians to take back their country. It's just so frustrating to watch that. I don't have any magical solution. I do know this, that if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, then it will be awfully difficult to A, get rid of the regime, and B, prevent the regime from providing like a nuclear umbrella for the folks like Hamas to do their dirty work, for fear. But the idea is that nobody will take on a proxy of Iran, knowing that Iran has a nuclear weapon. So we have to be very cognizant of the fact that as bad as things are with Iran, they could be a lot worse if they're allowed to get across the finish line.
And one thing that has been so successful so far, and I hate using the word successful in a time of war because there's nothing successful or pleasant about war, but one thing Israel has been able to do is to contain the war to one front, apart from skirmishes in the north. And when I say skirmishes, the threat from the north, from Lebanon, is absolutely massive. As I mentioned, 150,000 rockets, and they are of a higher quality than those being lobbed at Israel from Hamas, from Gaza, could destroy the infrastructure of Tel Aviv. What is stopping Nasrallah and the leadership in Hezbollah and in Lebanon from exacting a terrible destruction on Israel?
Yeah, this is an excellent point. This has been my focus. I did a study in I think it was 2019, for some folks in Washington on how Israel viewed the prospects of a multi-front war. So that's 4 years ago. And the answer from all the experts I spoke with, over 24, was we can handle a multi-front war. But of course, you want to sequence it. You want to deal with one theater and then another. I think that the situation I was thinking of at the time I did the study was that there would be a war in Hezbollah, with Hezbollah, like in 2006. And then Hamas would start a mini war in Gaza. This time it was Hamas who started the war, and the question is Nasrallah of Hezbollah going to join in? Well, I think we pretty much have the answer now, Johnny. Not 100%, but as of now, Hezbollah has made the decision, and I think that decision was really made in Tehran, that they're not going to start a second front. They're going to keep it hot. They're going to try to, basically try to divert Israeli forces into two. But, Johnny, they don't need the entire Israeli Defense Forces to deal with Gaza. I mean, it's not that difficult a situation militarily in terms of how many reservists you need on the border with Gaza. But I think there's always a chance things can escalate, and that's really a problem. You asked though about whether you go for at the head of the snake or you go after the proxies. Well, Iran's strategy is to use this is something an Ayatollah once told me. He was only a Hojatollah at the time. This was back in 2003. He got promoted to Ayatollah. He said, "What? Look, we're not really serious about Hamas or Hezbollah or Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is the other group in Gaza. What we need like we need a cudgel. We need like he almost called it like a bargaining chip. You see, we want to survive, and we can't have Israel attack us or our nuclear project, which is our ticket to survival. So we have these little proxies here to keep Israel occupied. You notice that Iran doesn't send any of their Iranians to fight for Hamas or in Lebanon or even in Syria, where they've been involved for the last 7, 8 years, even more actually, 10 years. Iran, they'll fight the last Palestinian, they'll fight the last Arab, but you don't see Iranians. You know why? Because the Iranian people don't really care that much about the Palestinian and Lebanese situation. They want to know why so much money is being diverted, so much energy is being diverted by this regime to the Palestinians and the Lebanese in these proxy wars against Israel, rather than helping the Iranian people. And that's a real problem for the leadership. So I think that, in a nutshell, explains where we are in this part of the world.
That is a fascinating insight, and thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. Jonathon Paris, who is a London-based media analyst and senior advisor for the Chertoff Group.